Welcome to Watercolour Splashes. I'm Lorraine Brown and my artist life is all about watercolour. There is never just one way to paint, but in Watercolour Splashes I will show you what works for me, with tips, techniques and experiments that you can try for yourself. Be inspired. Let's watercolour splash. In this Watercolour Splashes demonstration, we're going to have a little play at two things: mixing greens, but secondly, mixing in the palette versus mixing on the paper. And this is where I'd like to show you how much more exciting it is for creative type paintings when you mix on the paper. So let's have a go at doing a few examples. People seem to struggle with mixing greens, but they're far better if you can actually mix your greens with colours that you're already using in your painting, rather than just dip into a tube of green, which can look a little bit raw looking. For instance, look at this here, like a Viridian or a Phthalo green. If you were to use this colour on its own, straight out of a tube green, there's not very many places you might like to have that in your floral painting or your landscape painting without doing something to it. So if you're going to use tube greens, you need to be experimenting to find, what do I need to put in with it to actually create something a bit more natural looking, as opposed to something quite brash and raw looking from the tube. So there we are, there's two colours there, just to show that you can do something with a tube green, but probably not use that tube on its own. But I'm talking about actually mixing a blue and a yellow to make a green. So if you decide on colours that you're using and you've put some blue down, you can see here I'm picking into a Phthalo or Windsor blue here. I'm going to add some lemon yellow to it, and I'm going to make a nice green from this, a fresh looking green, and I'm painting it straight onto, so really wet onto dry, but mixed in the palette. If I take those same two colours and come from the palette, if I've mixed a little bit up to get it to the right consistency I might like here, but I put the yellow down and then I go into that same Phthalo blue or Windsor blue and add that in here. It's a very strong colour, the blue, so you'll always find when you're picking your colours that one will be bossier than the other. But I let this mix its green on the paper by letting the water take the two pigments around and mix. I've got the same green as this one, but I have now got sections that are yellower, more yellow, sections that are bluer, and somewhere it is actually quite mixed. And the whole time there's water there, it will carry on doing a bit of mixing. But if I were to use this as a green in my floral painting, that would look far more exciting than that can ever do. And they're exactly the same colours. So you can see mixing on the paper will give you interesting marks, fusions of the colours, and nice texture to make your paintings look interesting. Let's do another couple. So let's pick a different blue. Let's go with ultramarine. So here's French ultramarine in the palette. And let's add to this something like, let's go with this yellow, Quinacridone Gold. I'm mixing the two up here. It's a beautiful colour, an olivey green colour. So I put this down, two colours mixed together. I'm putting this, say, in my landscape painting or my floral painting, and I've got this lovely green, dull secondary, but a lovely olivey green. But what if I let it play on the paper instead? So I take the French ultramarine blue, and down it goes. Could have made these circles a little bit smaller, would have been a bit quicker. And I might even make it a little bit stronger. The whole time this is wet, you can carry on adding more paint to it. Now I'm going to go to the Quinacridone Gold and drop it in. And I might just have to manipulate it into the water a little bit, but not totally mix it around so it'll end up looking like that. What I want is I want some texture created with the two colours, but I want areas that I see it gold. I have areas where I see it bluer and others where it has exactly turned to green, just like that. But again, look at the interest from this versus that. Now obviously if you're doing a painting and you've only got a really tiny little part that you have to put some green in, you may well mix on your palette here, and you've only got to add something this big in a shape or on a subject that you're doing. It's only got to be that big, fine. You're not going to go doing a wet into wet for something this small, probably isn't worth it. So I have some green colour charts here that I've done over the years, and these are painted, mixed in the palette. However, these you keep as your reference. These are all your experiments about combining a blue with a yellow to see what shades of green you've got. Once you have these colour charts and you can see these greens, you know then that if you wish to get these sorts of colours, you know which blue you're going to get, you know which yellow you're going to get. But it doesn't mean to say you have to mix them up like this on your palette. You can take those same two colours. For instance, let's find something a bit exciting here. Let's do French ultramarine and aureolin. Here we are. So here's French ultramarine. Here is aureolin. This is the green that it will make. But I don't want to get this solid mixed up green on here. I would still like in my background of my flowers to have it varied. So I can take my aureolin, which I think is this one, and paint into my background area where I've got my foliage with this, either on a wet surface first or onto dry, then go for my French ultramarine that I want to mix with it and drop this in. More blue if I want. More yellow. And let it play on the paper. Now, if this was in my background somewhere, I'm going to end up with the green. So I've already established that this is the shades that I'm going to get, but I'm going to get it in an interesting way. I'm going to get it to look like this with plenty of texture, bluer parts, yellow parts, green parts. And my job of creating a painting then in the background is going to be so much easier if I've got something like this to play with. So before I finish this little watercolour splashes demo, I'm going to quickly do a little flower where I'm going to use some greens in the background. Right, well this could just be a quick little example of using wet into wet greens by demonstrating with this sunflower. So you don't have to draw the sunflower, but here, just so I've got an idea where I'm going. This is my flower, this is going to be background. So I can put the colours down for my sunflower. Again, if you have a look here, as I put the centre in, I am still doing wet into wet, mixing on the paper. Just varying up my yellows a little bit here just to keep it a bit interesting. This is very fast and furious for this, but let's just get this down because it's the greens in the background, so I want to show where mixing on the paper is the most exciting way to go. So here's a centre, not looking much like a sunflower centre, so I'll just put a bit more gold in here, letting it play on the paper. The pigment is just dropping off the tip of my brush, hitting the water and whatever paints are already on there and mixing on there. So we'll just quickly put a few petals, so it looks like a sunflower. Got a sunflower, so you get the idea. Right, one sunflower, rough and ready. So we are talking about green in our backgrounds. So this is a fairly big area to cover, so I probably would wet this first. Let's just get a little bit of a mop brush here so I can add a bit of water quickly. Thinking about this is all background. These are the leaves of the sunflowers. I don't want to have to paint every single shape, so if I can get something happy happening with the paint mixing on the paper, then I am going to have less of a job to turn it into something nice. So I'm just using up some of the yellow that was already here. Then I'm going to drop some blue into it. When you put it down, if you think, well, it's looking too blue, just go to your yellows, drop a little more yellow in, let it play on the paper. When it's dry, you can sharpen up a few of the shapes. To turn them into leaves. So here's a fairly plain side over here where I've just taken the colour off the palette that's all been mixed around. And the other side here is where I'm letting it do its little play over here. So if I let that dry off, I'll show you how you can take the nice fusion of colours that's happening over here and turn it into your background. So let's just dry that off for a second and then I'll add some shape to it. So for the convenience of doing this little video, I have taken the hairdryer to these background colours that are playing on the paper here. It is far better to take a few minutes and let them do their playing and dry naturally, because the whole time there is still moisture in the paper, those pigments are still finding places to go. So you will come up with some very interesting marks and fusions of colour that you can build on for your foliage if you let it dry naturally like that. But when we take the hairdryer to it, of course, we're just stopping it. So what you see there is really, you know, what you're going to get because you've just finished the cooking process. But you know, I want to get on with the video, so there's no way we're going to take ages to stand here and let it dry naturally. But this is what we've got. So, quick flower up here to show it is sunflowers we're doing, but what are we going to do with the greens? Well, now we've got this interesting background, even with taking the hairdryer to it. You can see I've got some parts that are very mixed green. I've got some where it stayed blue. I've got some few places where it's yellow. And over here it's paler and it's a bit more pre-mixed. So we've got combinations really of this and this. So I may not have to do very much work to this to bring it into an interesting looking background, because I will make sure I take advantage of some of the marks that are already here. So sometimes that is a case of just taking the same colours that you've already mixed and get a slightly creamier mixture of those colours mixed on your palette, yes, because you really are just using these now to make some shapes, and I've got nothing here to show me what the shape of a sunflower leaf looks like. But if it was something like this, I could just add some darker paint around the shape, leaving some of the lovely background to show through. And I don't have to do every single leaf. A bit of negative painting there, but keeping the beautiful colours that are there. Where it's plainer over here, I may have to do something a wee bit more creative, a bit more work required. This is painting a bit more positively here. So in other words, painting a leaf and not painting the background, whereas this was really painting around the leaf. Of course, it would pay sometimes to have an image or some real sunflowers here to make sure we're getting the shapes and whatever right. This is fast and furious little demo, but I want you just to see the difference of actually letting paint mix on your paper so that you don't have to paint every tiny little mark. Of that green in the middle here, and there we go. One quick little demo mixing your greens on the paper. So just to recap, you do colour charts. Whenever you buy new paints, you always have a look at how will they react to what I already use. Why have I bought them in the first place? Because I want to see what nice greens I can make. So you're going to take a blue, you're going to take a yellow, and you're going to do swatches. And yes, these have been mixed in the palette to make the swatches up. So these are my reference charts. So then if I'm going to do some painting and I want greens, I know I could just have a look at these and say, well, yes, I actually want these sorts of shades, so I'm going to stick with what I see here. But when I ultimately then use them in a painting, I will put them down in this manner, not round and round, and get flat looking greens. Because now I've got a very interesting looking background. I've only had to do a couple of leaf shapes, but that definitely shows a lot of foliage in a sunflower field. And really that's what we want. We want to have creative looking paintings. We don't want to have a painting that looks like we've had to paint every tiny little part of it. Well, I hope that might encourage you to do some green charts of your own. It's not even green that you have to do this with. You do this with a lot of new colours that you buy. But greens in particular, because we use so many of them. So experiment with your greens, see what sort of interesting colours you can come up with.